Hello and welcome to Technically Speaking, the show where we dive into some of the most exciting new tech. I'm your host Ash, and today we've got the Roccat Kone Air. If you've been a PC gamer for a while, you will recognize the Kone. They've been rocking this mold since 2007, but they go by the mantra, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So let's just have a quick little rundown of the mouse. Of course, you got your two standard clicks, nice and satisfying. You've got your scroll wheel, got two side buttons. That's plenty enough if you play FPS, one for your grenade, one for your knife. Nice little clicky shift button here. The skates at the bottom, they've got a bit of a cover at the moment. We'll take those off and test those out. I kind of go for a bit of a hybrid kind of fingertip palm grip. And you know what, it's feeling quite a nice size to that. The weight is maybe a bit heavier than I would normally go for, but we'll jump into that in a bit. I definitely kind of opted this as maybe a bit more of an FPS mouse. So because of that, of course, we start up a shooter. We've got go to the orange door here. So we'll give it a little bit of a go and we'll see how it all kind of feels. It's feeling pretty smooth so far. As I mentioned, it's a tad heavier than I'm used to, but either way, it's flowing pretty well. It's feeling pretty nice, like the grip feels nice. It's got the kind of plastic top and the rubber sides, and immediately it is kind of gripping nicely onto my fingers here. The kind of side of my ring fingers kind of hit quite snug under that right button. It does come in at $59.99, which is kind of the industry standard. I think that's pretty expected for a solid wireless mouse. You will notice at the front there is no port here for a wire, so you don't charge it. It is purely battery powered, and that comes with double A's. Now let's have a little zoom in and look at some of the build quality of this mouse. So first up, we're going to start with the grip. As I said before, I kind of have a hybrid fingertip palm grip, and it feels really nice here. Claw isn't going to quite work, but there's lots of grip on the sides to keep your hand on it. It has the rubber on the sides and the plastic on top. So even if you do have a long gaming session and you have a bit of sweat on your hands, I imagine your fingertips will be sticking nicely there. The rubber is quite a hard material as well, so it has a bit of a bumpy finish to keep that grip in, but I have a feeling that even after months of gaming, it's not going to wear out any time soon. Let's also look at the scroll wheel on top. It's quite a wide boy, a nice rubbery finish, and it has the grooves just enough to keep your fingertips nice and in check. It's not too clicky. It's a bit of a dampened sound, and that continues on when you click in the mouse button as well. Quite a subtle, almost a bit of a bassy click to it, which is quite nice if you don't like the really clicky mice and buttons. Next up, let's look at pre and post travel. So we're going to look at the two main buttons here. Just for the specs, they use the Roccat Titan optical switches. They feel quite nice on the fingers, and in terms of kind of the response time clicking in, they feel pretty immediate. And when it comes to the two main buttons up front, they do have a nice little click to them. I'll move over now to the comfort. I quite like the shape of this. It fits nicely in my hand. I don't have massive hands, but there does seem to be some room. So if you do have particularly big hands, there won't be a problem here. Over to the side, one thing I was concerned about when I first saw it and got my hands on it was the placement of the two buttons. You have the easy shift button and your two extra buttons here. I was a little bit worried that my thumb might slip and hit this easy shift button, but it does seem that there's enough space between the two so that your thumb can sit nicely there without interrupting your gameplay. Let's look at the underside now, because I want to have a quick peek at the skates. Now, some gaming mice opt for some massive skates either side. We've got the 4 set up here on each of the corners. These are PTFE heat treated skates, and they're factory worn in, so ready out of the box to go. And as we move it in all the different directions, it feels pretty balanced. Now, it's important to remember the weight, as I mentioned before, 119 grams. So you could have a mouse with the best skates in the world, but if it's pretty heavy, it's not going to move as far. And I think that's the case here. So if you're going to be having your mouse on a very low sensitivity and you like moving your whole wrist, maybe this isn't the best one, but even then, it still feels pretty nice. Also on the underside, let's look at the sensor, very important. It's the PixArt 3370 in there. Some high-end esports mouses are still cheekily using that, so for £60, it's a bit of a steal, works very nicely. And in terms of positioning, it's not quite in the center, it's a bit more forward, so if that's to your preference, that's always nice. And we'll test this out a little bit later with a little straight line test. Let's jump into the buttons now. You have your straightforward left and right click. your mouse wheel, which also clicks. You have the little DPI button here as well, which by default just goes through the preset DPIs. Two of these side buttons, which are nice clickety-clackety buttons. And the most interesting one here, which is at the bottom under the thumb, which is the easy shift. And what this does is it lets you hold down the easy shift and remap any of these buttons to have alternative functions. So you're getting double the real estate. And while we're speaking about buttons, of course, we want to know how they sound. So we're going to do a little ASMR test here. Again, quite a thuddy one. Easy shift. And the two side buttons. Oh, okay, that's interesting because before when we did the creak test, this didn't come up. But this back button here, if you have a quick listen, has a bit of a twang after the click. Now I suspect, kind of sounds like a spring vibrating to me, but doesn't happen with every click, but I don't know, some people will find that a little bit annoying. Other than that, they'll sound pretty nice, just not this secondary button. So now we're going to do a little bit of a straight line test, obviously in the best program ever, Microsoft Paint. Let's see how this performs, shall we? Start off with some nice up straight lines. Now obviously the sensor is positioned slightly forward. I'm going to assume these curves are due to the sensor and not my lack of ability. Side ones feel pretty good actually. We'll do some more rapid ones. This feels pretty good. There we go. I think that feels pretty good. So I've loaded up Roccat Swarm, which is their universal software that they use for all of their peripherals, and I've got my Roccat Kone Air plugged in, so I thought I would have a quick little scan through the settings and see what you can do with it. So the basic settings, as you can see here, you have your normal vertical scroll speed, you also have your normal Windows pointer speed, mouse acceleration is an option if you'd ever want that for whatever reason. We also have our DPI switches, so as I mentioned, you do have this button on here, you have 5 DPI settings and you can adjust these to your liking. You have your standard remapping of all the buttons, but you also have the easy shift, and that's easy enough to remap to give all of these buttons a secondary function. We do also have advanced settings as well. You have the polling rate, currently have that set to 1000 Hz, which is the highest setting, and we have a battery status. Interestingly enough, it does say currently 100%, but only 228 hours left. And the battery we've put in here is the one that came out of the box, and according to Roccat, that should last for around 400 hours. Obviously we're only getting 228 here. You've also got several gaming profiles, so you can set those up for different games, as well as a macro manager, so you can go through all your different games and have all your macros saved depending on what you're playing. Now, as it's a wireless mouse, battery life is very important. It doesn't have a wire to charge it, instead runs on AA's housed in this little backside panel. As you can see here, it has 2 slots for the batteries, but interestingly, it does run on just the single battery. I was wondering if it would feel off balance, but you know what? If you handed me this mouse and didn't tell me, I'd have no idea. Roccat say you're going to get about 800 hours of gameplay with both AAs in, and that's around half if you just have the single AA. Of course, qualities of batteries vary massively, so I'd assume that 800 is on the top end depending on what you're using. Now, if this Kone Air doesn't have enough flashing lights and buttons for you, then it's not the only one in the series. You do also have the Kone XP Air. It has a bit more RGB color implementation on it and a few more buttons as well. So if you like your MMOs or any games where you just need to be mapping a whole load of buttons, that might be more up your street. And for those who take their FPS very seriously, you have the Kone Air Pro, very similar, a bit more RGB, but also much lighter at only 75 grams. Now, it's my favorite part because we're gonna have a bit of a playtest. So I've got Enter the Gungeon here. It's a great game to kind of show off the mouse sensitivity and accuracy because your whole camera moves around as you play. So for my kind of grip, it does feel nice. I kind of have a hybrid kind of fingertip palm style, and it feels nice enough to move around. Again, I can't help but wish it was a tad lighter, but to be completely honest, I think with one battery, I could get used to it. I don't think it's heavy enough that you have any kind of like wrist strain or anything after a long gaming session. I feel like the sliders are doing a good job. Doesn't feel like there's much friction here. There's no kind of unpredictable movements. And overall, it's feeling pretty slick. So I've loaded up AimLab now, and I've got a Valorant game mode set up. Now, this isn't my normal FPS setup, so no judgment here on my FPS skills. We're purely looking at the Roccat Kone Air, so I'll restart one and we'll see how it feels. But immediately using this, I do feel like I could get used to it. I think sometimes when you use a mouse, you kind of immediately know whether you can settle into it, but this is very ergonomic. And especially for my grip, it does feel very nice. I've loaded up now Paranautical Activity to kind of round out our game test, so we'll jump in and see how the Roccat Kone Air fares. I've mainly been sticking to kind of FPS style games, but I feel like that is what this mouse is suited to, on top of doing your bog standard work. And to be honest, no one wants to watch me do that. Again, it's all feeling pretty smooth. Now that I've played with it a little bit, I feel like I'm getting accustomed to it. It's hard to not die and talk at the same time, but we've got this spider. Nice and easy. I already feel my accuracy improving as I'm getting used to it. I think one thing I'm curious about as I would be using it more is how easy the easy shift button is to use. It's in a good place for your thumb. It's very easy to click down on it. But one thing that I'm thinking is that kind of the way you're balancing your hand as you use that, some keys will be easier to press than others. So for example, if I'm using this easy shift button, the two main clickers are plenty easy to use. But of course, I don't have access to the two side buttons. And also the mouse wheel as well might be a bit dodgy, but that might just be something that I need to learn muscle memory as opposed to kind of a design error. Otherwise though, the whole thing feels pretty smooth. All the buttons feel quite responsive. So, who is the Roccat Kone Air for? Well, Roccat say it's an all-round mouse, and you know what? I think it ticks those boxes. If you want something ergonomic and comfortable while you're doing your work day, I think you'll have no problems with this whatsoever. But it is also very good when you want to jump into the games. It's not quite as light as some FPS mice, and it doesn't have the buttons that MMO ones do either. But what can I say, for an all-rounder, it really does hit the mark.